Imagine this, if you will. You're 5 years old, and it's 1974. Your parents have a tumultuous and toxic marriage. Your father says to you, "We would be so happy if it was just you and me and your sister." And you agree because you love your dad and you just want to be with your dad. So over the next 3 years, hiding out in plain sight is the name of the game. You're forced to live a lie. You have to call his girlfriend your mom. You can't go to people's houses. You can't go trick-or-treating. You just go to school and you go home. You're forced to live this lie. And then your second grade teacher calls and says, "Hey, listen, I was just watching 60 Minutes and the show showed your husband and your daughters, and I just wanted to call and let you know so you're careful. It was about abduction." And you hear about this the next morning over breakfast. And you're told, "You know, if we get caught, it's going to be your fault. By the way, you finished your book report, right? Good. All right, you're going to go to school. Don't talk to anybody. If they ask you questions, say nothing." And so you go to school, an eight-year-old in third grade, with those thoughts running through your head. Now, in today's society, there are some subjects that are taboo. Surprisingly enough, domestic violence is still something that's really hard for people to talk about. Also custody, and thirdly is parental abduction. Now, when you speak with somebody who's been a victim of domestic violence, it's usually a woman who has gone through a lot in her lifetime, has been through therapy and other things, and has come out pretty well. But when you've spoken with a child or a person who's been the trophy in a custody battle, that's a completely different thing, because that child was an innocent person and was brainwashed and continues to live with those things throughout adulthood. The legalities of parental abduction are misconstrued and misunderstood. How do I know? I'm the older daughter in the story that I've just shared with you. Now, whenever I share this story with people, the first thing they ask is, "How can that really be kidnapping? That was your dad. He loved you. Surely you misunderstood." According to the Department of Justice in 2006, of the nearly 250,000 kidnappings reported each year, more than 3/4 are perpetrated by someone the child knows, usually a parent. Most children are found within the first few weeks, but more than 20% are missing for months or even years. Now, my mom, it took her 3 years to find us. Today we're going to talk a little bit about why it's a taboo subject, how to identify if a child could be an abduction survivor, and what it's like to be reunited and the aftermath that happens as life goes on. Let's start by exploring why people think this is a taboo subject. I've interviewed Cindy Rudimentkin of Polyclass Foundation. She's the program director, and they are located in Petaluma, California. This organization helps families to be reunited with their children if they're runaways, and abduction cases and other situations like that. Did you know that most of the southern states in the United States of America still do not consider parental abduction to be illegal? They don't think it's a crime because they're with a family member, and because they're with a family member, they must be safe. Statistics show that children are harmed more by a parent than they are by a stranger or an acquaintance. People's perceptions really do not match what really is going on here. And because it's so hard to believe that a parent would not harm a child if they're taken, then it must not be so. By definition, the word to abduct means that you carry off or lead away a person illegally and by force, especially to kidnap. So abduction is kidnapping, and kidnapping is illegal. So that means that any type of abduction is going to be illegal. Next, let's look at what might be clues and when you're speaking with a child who may be an abduction child. Now, children are normally very animated, happy, they go to school, they talk about the things that are going on in their lives. Children who are abducted tend to be withdrawn, very secretive, depressed, just like an abused child. Polyclass Foundation put a campaign ad in People magazine about 10 years ago, 2010, and the campaign was entitled, "An Abducted Child is an Abused Child." The editors received feedback and said that the readership didn't like it, so they quit the campaign altogether and didn't pursue it further. Can you imagine that happening with other domestic issues like domestic violence or custody? No. Now, when you're speaking with a child who may be the victim of an abduction, here are some ways that you can get that vibe. They say, "Oh, my mom is dead," and they have absolutely no reaction. It's very rote. That is a good indication. Also, they can say, "My mom didn't want me, so we left," and they just don't show any kind of emotion. You know that there's issue to be concerned about there too. If you call them by their name and they don't respond, it's usually because it's not their actual name. So if your child's name is Jim and you tell people to call you Sam, and they say, "Hey Sam," and they don't recognize, this is a child, remember, they don't recognize that is their name, that's going to happen. They're kept out of school to avoid detection, and they're forced to lie. According to Ms. Rudimetkin, family life is not normal. They don't get to go to the doctors or the dentist. There's no after-school activities or sports. They're not encouraged to participate in anything. And there is absolutely no inner circle of support. Literally nobody to save them. They're brainwashed into believing that they deserve this, and that if they're caught, it's going to be that child's fault for having spoken about it. Let's talk about how the reunion works. It's just as complicated and as emotional as the abduction and living in hiding. Now, when you're preparing a parent, the left behind parent, it is not for the faint of heart. This is really, really difficult time anyway. So the first thing that needs to happen is established custody. Who actually has custody of the child? If the left behind parent has custody and fills out a missing persons report, things go very, very fast. The DA gets involved. There's a warrant out for the abducting parent's arrest. A full-fledged investigation is done, and an Amber Alert is released. If custody cannot be established and a missing persons report is not made, then it goes very slowly. The left behind parent is told to find a mediator and to get into counseling, and it's much, much harder to recover that child. This is where the Polyclass Foundation comes in. They work with the National Center for Missing Children. They have a much smaller caseload, so they're able to offer a lot more support. So when they're helping to prep the left behind parent, their family and friends, with recovery and the reunion, they receive a lot of counseling. And the counseling is important because, the parent is just worried to death, and this child, they have no idea what's going on with their child. So they have to understand that this is something that they need to be concerned about. Planning for when the recovery happens and knowing how that could be. Planning for when the reunion happens. How to navigate life after the recovery. And this is all done while the children are being searched for by the professionals. Now, the reunion experience is different for the parent than it is for the child who's been recovered. The parent, because they are the ones who are searching and they've involved their friends and family, when they receive news that their child has been recovered and a reunion is happening soon, the reaction is that they want to enjoy and celebrate, and so they would want their friends and family to join them. And you know what happens in today's society during celebrations? The phones come out, there's video, there's pictures, there's lots of shouting, and it's a big party, it's a celebration. But what we have to remember is that this child has been through something very, very traumatic, and a lot of the situation is unknown at the time of recovery. And so obviously during the reunion, it's hard to tell then as well. Now keep in mind that when the child is recovered, there is a mental health specialist that helps with the packing up of the child's belongings, and they get to say goodbye, because even though this has been a traumatic incident, they still have people that they care about. And so this is an opportunity to say goodbye to those people. When the child is brought into the reunion, the child needs to be eased into this situation, because in some situations they actually do believe that their parent is dead or their parent did not want them. And can you imagine the shock of what that's like when you're told as a child that mommy really is actually still alive, or mommy never stopped wanting you? Also, if that child actually knows the entire story and has been told to say nothing, they are forced to live a lie. And as we know, if you lie often enough, you're going to keep thinking that. And so the shock of being reunited with the left behind parent is real. According to Liz Hart Haviv of Take Root, and this is an organization that actually works hand in hand with Polyclass Foundation, recovery can be a re-abduction. That's how hard it is for the child. Post-recovery is an uphill battle. This is where the actual work really begins. The child needs to release all of the things that they've been brainwashed with, and that's a very difficult situation. Intense therapy is required for all family members, the child, the siblings, the parent, and the whole family together. As life begins to improve, the therapy lessens, but that is according case by case. Some choose later to live as if nothing ever happened. Some people, though, are highly affected decades later. The statistics for this kind of reunion vary a lot, especially if it's an international abduction. If the abducting parent has family that is overseas, recovering that child can be really, really difficult. If they've been in that country for a year or longer, they can actually be a resident and not be released to go to the left behind parent. Or if there's a lot of money involved, it's really easy to disappear into the world. How can friends and family help? This is a very traumatic situation for everyone, and life will never ever be the same. So while the child is missing, you can support them, the parent, the left behind parent, with the grief throughout the grief cycle. It can be a sounding board. You can provide dinners and provide friendship. When the child has been found, you can discourage making the reunion a big deal, and you can help with rides, babysitting, and meals. As you can see, parental abduction is child abuse. You're probably wondering how we got found. So as you know, September 26, 1976, Dan Rothers had a segment on 60 Minutes that was about parental abduction. And my mother was nominated by Arnold Miller, founder of Children's Rights, to be interviewed on that show. The second time it aired, the rerun in May, our landlord recognized us, called the authorities, and the investigators worked really hard that summer. We were recovered in September, and when we were reunited, I was scared to death. I thought it was my fault, and I thought that I was going to be in a lot of trouble for it. Turns out that I continued to live with my father after a custody battle, and my life has been affected since then. I was not allowed to go for any type of counseling services, and it's only been in the last 11 years that I've really found help for myself and have gotten over much of this. When my father passed away in 2011, a very strange release and relief and closure happened for me that I was not expecting. And that's something that can happen with a person who's been the trophy of a custody battle and been the victim of a parental abduction. Thank you for listening.